Might remember from the lab, let's see, number 10, or the assignment rather, assignment number 10 in the lab was about correlation and regression, and that's when I first introduced you to something called standard error of estimation. The symbol is Sy.x. That's how we say it, Sy.x. SPSS does not call it standard error of estimation. It calls it standard error of the estimate, but it's the same thing. All right, so don't get confused. So this is a measure of something, right? What is it a measure of? It's measuring the mean, so it's an average. The mean vertical distance points are to the line. In other words, Sy.x is measuring the average amount of scatter around the line. But remember, averages can take on different values depending on whether you calculate mean, median, or mode. Those are the ones you learned about. So Sy.x uses the mean. All right. So it's calculating the mean vertical distance that points are to the line, which is basically saying the average amount of scatter. All right. So let's look at this diagram first, where we only have 1 point on our scatter plot. We're just going to look at this one value here. This is the y value. So for this x, whatever this x is down here, this value here, if you line it up, that's the y that got associated with this x value. All right. So here we have your actual data point. Now let's pretend we've drawn the regression line. This point here, all right, so for this same value of x, this would be our predicted value for y. Okay. So remember, this value here, this is your actual value of y. So for this x, this is what your y value was. But for this x value, this is what we would have predicted for y. So you see this little notation here? This is called y prime. And it means this is the predicted value of y. In some books, probably because different countries use different symbols, like in Canada, we don't use y prime, or at least we didn't when I was a student. We used a little cap on the top, looks like a triangle, and it was called y hat or y toque. That's a joke. You know, Canada, you know, you wear toques, hats, toques. Okay, moving right along. So y prime or y hat, that's your predicted value of y. Now, the distance between them, that vertical distance, is how much you were off. This is what you predicted, and this is the actual value. So if we were to subtract them, y minus y prime, we would get a measure of error. It's the distance between what we found and what we predicted. All right. So you subtract them, you get error. And by convention, we do y minus y prime. We do not do y prime minus y. Now, another name for error is residual. For some reason, when we talk about correlation and regression, we like to use the term residual. I have no idea why we do that. We just do. All right. So when you see the word residual, we're talking about error. So if we're talking about one residual, we're talking about one distance between a particular value of y and its predicted value. All right, so now if we look at this diagram, which is figure 12.5b in your book, if we look at this diagram, we're looking at many different values of y and many predicted y values, right? So the red, where's my cursor? It's gone. Oh, now my slide is gone. Oh no. Okay, here we go. So these red stars represent your actual data. So these are the actual y values. And the points that are on the line, these are all y primes. These are what you're predicting. They will always fall on the line. Y primes fall on the line because you're getting those y primes by the equation. And that equation is what defines the line. Okay, So keep in mind, y primes are always those values that fall on the line, okay? If you ever, if there was, for example, a question and it put y prime out here, then you know something's wrong. Y primes are defined by the line. They will always be on the line. Whereas your actual values of y, usually they're not on the line, but sometimes they are, right? That's possible that they'll fall on the line. Sometimes your actual values of y will be a far distance away from the line, and sometimes they'll be pretty close, right? What we can say is that this line here was drawn in such a way that the average or the mean vertical distance points r to the line is minimized. It's as small as it possibly can be. So in other words, if we were to take all these y minus y primes and calculate, using a formula, calculate what is the average distance that those points are to the line, we would see that that average distance is as small as it possibly can be. So what Sy.x is doing is it's not measuring one specific distance that y is to y prime. That would just be one specific distance. It would be one residual. What Sy.x is doing is it measures the average distance that all points are to the line. All right, that's an important distinction.